Hello, everyone. My name is Stefania. I'm going to present myself in the next slide. I am super excited to be here on behalf of and with my friends from CXL Institute. A couple of announcements before we start. During the webinar, I'm gonna try to talk for no more than 25 minutes, and we're gonna ask questions at the end. If you have some urgent question that you really want it to be answered, you can post it at any time. If you want to do so, if you want to submit any question, please use the chat tool and now the question and answers, so we can all follow the conversation. Also, please send your messages to all attendees, not just all panelists, so that we can so that everyone can follow the conversation. Again, I'm gonna try to capture some questions that seem to be more urgent for clarification during the presentation, but otherwise, I'm gonna go ahead with my presentation and try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. All right, again, I'm super excited to be here to talk to you about the use of personas for marketing and other applications. In general, we're going to try to present a practical guide to incorporate personas into your business strategy, whatever your business strategy is. About me, I'm not going to talk much about me, but my name is Stefania Mereu. My background is in cognitive psychology. I'm currently Director of User Experience and Design at Pearson, and I'm also co-founder of data scientist at DataSense, a company that I have with my husband. So let's jump into the definition of personas. What is a persona? Well, if we follow Alice Cooper's definition of persona, personas can be defined as a precise descriptive model of your users or customers, what they wish to accomplish and why. And so put it in very practical terms, a persona just needs to contain enough detail to basically put you inside your customers' heads to see why they have certain needs and goals, and try to address them with your product, marketing campaign, or service. The goals of this webinar is to kind of very quickly learn how to maximize personas impact in your organization. So we're going to try to address 4 ways to do that. We're going to try to learn how to identify what types of personas your organization needs. We're going to learn how to decide what kind of data to use to create them. And we're also going to learn how to effectively present the personas to the rest of the organization. Because there's no good data inside your head, the data needs to be presented. And also we're going to learn to apply persona to real use case scenarios. So specific examples on A/B testing versus product and marketing campaigns. All right, so let's start with an overview of what type of personas your organization might need. This is not a comprehensive list of personas. But personas can really, you can have different needs for different types of personas, right? So for example, user personas will focus more on what will my user do with my product. And of course, as an action items, you may want to know how to encourage desirable behaviors on those personas. Marketing personas will have a lot of the same elements, won't be any different in the presentation compared to the user personas, but they will focus more on what customers feel and desire, and your action items will be more focused on how to convince them that they want your product, right? Lastly, again, this is not a comprehensive list. Some people like to call buyer personas, but again, in general, you may have customer personas that you want to focus on, like in a broader sense, on what they need from your service or product in a more general way. And we're going to address that in a second. So again, user personas focus mostly on user needs. So what your user needs from your product, goals. You can have other aspects and other elements in user personas that go, that tap into the web navigation style. And you may have interest in knowing other aspects of this user's aptitudes and personalities, such as, for example, technology, right? How do they feel about technology? Are they advanced users? Are they naive users? So the best application of user personas is to influence product and product roadmaps. You want to know what are their needs, web navigation styles, goals, and technology aptitude. And this information will be useful, for example, when building a website, especially if the website is presenting a product or a service, or it's a product itself, right? If users will use your website or application as a product. And also, user personas should be useful, especially in larger organizations, in prioritizing product features in the roadmap and making decisions on, for example, how to name call to action buttons and things like that. Marketing personas mostly serve the purpose of targeting your marketing campaign to a real audience. So instead of referring to a generic customer, it's best to craft your marketing campaigns and marketing messages, and we're going to have a concrete example later, onto a specific type of customer rather than anybody. Wishes, desires, fears, aspirations are all things that you can try to explore in this type of persona. Bad marketing campaigns tend to be more generic and focus on very generic desires and preferences, right? Such as we have the best product, or we have the cheapest one, right? I personally don't know anyone who would like to use a bad product or that like to overpay for things. So again, not that these things are not desirable, but they're very generic, right? So they don't give you any unfair advantage over your marketing campaign or your competitors. So you need to be a little more precise, right? So a mom who's shopping for a car, for example, will still want a good car that's inexpensive and affordable, right? But there will be other drivers that will be more specific to her fears, wishes, and desires, such as the reassurance that the car will be safe for her kids, right? And as I announced, again, this is not a comprehensive list, but you can have a different type of persona that is more like a customer personas. And the reason why I chose this one is because compared to the previous two, it's less focused on digital, right? You may still need to point out in the persona what are the goals and needs of this type of user or customer, their fears and wishes, right? If you want to still tap their emotion into the marketing campaigns. But you may also want to know something about their shopping habits or their journey. And the journey should include all touch points. And some of these touch points will be digital. Some of these touch points will be non-digital, right? Such as the experience in a store, for example. And so, again, you kind of need to embrace with this type of persona more like a bird's eye view and include information that kind of looks at the big picture, right? Including customer service, for example, customer calls, right? And so if you haven't seen a customer journey, which you might want to include in another persona, this is how customer journeys tend to look like. It literally is just a timeline of the steps that a customer goes through when interacting with your product or service, right? So these tend to be very useful if you want to have an overall picture of what the customer does and when, and what the touch points are at each point of the timeline. So in general, in both digital and non-digital space, knowing your users will really help you shape your product or service. So that's what you want to keep in mind. It's the more you know about your audience, the better you'll be able to make those decisions about what to focus on and what specific market to focus on, and what specific message you want to send about your product or service. So moving along. The other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is the types of data that you can use to create your personas. So, of course, I have my opinions, right, on what kind of data I'd like to have when I start building personas, right? And it's typically a good combination of qualitative versus quantitative data. But there's many things I wish I could have and do. For example, I like to go to Mars, right? But I certainly am not planning that trip that year, right? Maybe one day. So with data, you kind of have to say that you have to have the same realism. You have to be practical about it, right? What kind of data can you have and can you obtain in your organization? So not having the perfect combination of data points should certainly not prevent you from getting any data at all, right? So just be realistic of what kind of data you can collect and obtain in your organization, or maybe what data your organization already has sitting around that you can use for the purpose of building personas, and start from there. Again, the only thing you don't want to do is base your personas on stereotypes, right? That will only give you access to very generic information. And your competitors will have access to the same type of information, so that won't give you any advantage. So you want to build realistic archetypes that are based on real data, whichever that data may be. So evidence can come from different sources, right? I'm very inclusive in my concept of evidence and data. Of course, some data is weaker than other. Some data is stronger. And if we really kind of want to summarize the types of data that you more commonly will have access to, first of all, it's anecdotal and personal data, right? And then we have qualitative and more subjective kind of data and insights. And then, of course, we have quantitative data, and which tends to be more objective, not always, but it tends to be more objective and just tell you exactly what's going on and what's happening. Now, again, there's three types of data. Why do I call the first one the weakest? Well, it's hard to base product roadmaps and marketing campaigns and knowledge about your users based on either somebody else's experience or your own personal experience, although there are exceptions. For example, Pierre Caraquia, founders of ClassPass, she had the idea of ClassPass by tapping on her personal experience of struggling, finding fitness classes that she could enjoy. This is one of the few and most recent cases of success of somebody founding a company based on their own intuition and shaping the first product based on their own persona. But this is certainly an exception in the field. It's not the norm. And most of the times, the general rule of thumb is that you're not the user of your product or service. So relying on personal data is somewhat risky. Again, sometimes it works, but most likely it won't. Then we have qualitative data. So we have in-depth interviews can be used for that purpose. Of course, you have to have a goal when you go through the process of start conducting interviews. They can also be more open, right? Especially if you choose a more open kind of format for collecting qualitative data that can be contextual inquiry, right? Which is more focused on what is the user doing, or what is the customer doing in their own environment, or whether they're likely to use your product. And participant observation as well. Some of these techniques are borrowed from anthropology. And again, the whole point is for you to be open-minded in what you're going to learn out of these interviews and techniques. This kind of data tends to answer the why, right? So it doesn't tell you exactly in an unbiased way what tends to happen at a large scale, but it definitely allows you and gives you the opportunity to really deeply understand the user and the context in which the user tends to work in. Then, of course, we have quantitative data. Typically, what they say about quantitative data is that it answers the what, so it tells you what's happening, right? And especially when we're talking about aggregate analytics, such as the ones that you will have from Google Analytics. In general, it helps you to identify or confirm patterns, right? So for example, if you start with qualitative data and move on to the quantitative data, right? If you have access to both in your organization, sometimes you will start from an interview, you'll get inspiration on what to look for, and then you'll go and confirm this data points with analytics or survey data that will tell you a little bit more how widespread is this behavior that this one user is exhibiting, right? On the other hand, you can also move the other way around, and you can say, okay, I'm going to start with quantitative data. I'm going to look at my analytics. I'm going to look at my, I'm going to run a large-scale survey at first, right? And then once you have identified the patterns, quantitative data tend to leave a lot of ambiguity and unknowns, especially if you run a survey. Let's say you have an open question or you have a data point that's surprising, right? A lot of the times it won't be clear why the customers or your respondents responded in a certain way. And when that happens, it's useful to go back to qualitative techniques and just deepen your understanding of the patterns that you observed with quantitative data through interviews. And what do you do after you collect all your data, right? Once you have all your data, you have to summarize it. There is no, like I mentioned earlier, there is no data if there's no summary, right? So whether you're a researcher, if you're an experienced researcher, you probably know this already, but if you're not, really don't underestimate the power of summarizing the insights from your research. So numerous times I was told, for example, we know a lot about our customers, right? So you ask, what do you know? It was like, we know a lot. And then I was typically, in this case, it's handed like 20 pages of not very grammatical notes, right, from interviews and customer visit sites and things like that, right? Unfortunately, that type of data tends to be somewhat worthless, right? Nobody has the time to go and look at all the notes and summarize them. And even if they did, they were not there, right? So they probably won't have enough context to interpret a lot of the notes that you have collected. So it is absolutely important to summarize the notes that you're taking during interviews and to tell a story with that data, right? And today we're gonna explore a couple of techniques to being able to do that. Now, you can do this. You can literally build a summary, and I hope this is not from any of your companies or agencies, but I found a couple of good examples online that I wanted to share with you. This is not a particularly attractive way to present the data, but it's presenting the data, right? So it's one way to summarize all those notes into one format. Again, it's just, it does have an archetype. This person is a CEO. It is an indication of the company size. It is a picture just to understand how people like this look like. Again, this is not probably a real user or customer. This is probably most likely, a picture taken off one of those, either internet or one of those free image databases, right? But again, it's well summarized. It's not particularly attractive though, right? As a general suggestion, I will say, if you have designed resources in your organization, try to do something like this, right? Try to present your data in a way that's appealing to the eye, that's diversified, so that the user doesn't feel, that whoever is reading this data doesn't feel bored about reading the data, right? What's better about this particular persona compared to the previous one is that data is diversified, right? There's different formats. There's some text, there's some bullet points, but there's also some plots and some logos, right? And some of this is just more immediate information to digest compared to having to read all the bullet points that were in the previous persona. So in general, if you have a designer on site, ask for help. Or if you are a designer, don't feel shy about using your design skills to build the personas. The more attractive the personas, the more likely that someone in your organization will be willing to read the content of your personas. Again, the goal, once you have the personas, is for the organization to use them, right? So if you want to achieve that goal, you want to make sure that the task of reading the information is not daunting. Also, you have to consider the cultural fit of the persona, right? So in other words, depending on what type of organization you work for, something presented in a more serious way could have more traction, right? Now, if you work for a super cool startup, right, and people tend to be responsive to innovative way to present information or content or product, then you might want to find a different and more creative package for your personas, right? Here's, we see an example from MailChimp. I think these are MailChimp persona from a few years ago. Again, not the clearest of the data presentation, but certainly appealing, probably a good cultural fit for that company that the personas were built for, okay? I have a few more examples. Again, this is Miss Mac from 2012. Kind of oldish, but again, a completely different way to present the information, more like an infographic kind of style. And again, there's no right or wrong answer, right? But you do want to follow the rule of the persona being a good, well-presented, clear and well-presented and possibly attractive way to present the data, but also a good fit for a company. Probably if you work for a very serious, financial institution, this might not be the best way to present your data, right? You want your executive to take the data seriously, right? So again, it really kind of depends on the context. And again, this is another example. You can make it more cartoonish, you can make it more serious, and also consider the medium, right? So for example, you may need to find ways for people to being able to access your personas as well, right? So if you just make the personas, send them with an email, half of the people won't read the email and your personas will never fly, right? So if you work in an office and you have UX, marketing, or whatever other space, and the office allows you to do that, it's not a bad idea to print your personas and hang them on the wall so that people can see that they exist, right? Again, choose the best way to package and present your personas, considering the organization and the type of organization that you work for. And now let's go through a few scenarios. The first scenario that I want to show you is A/B testing. Again, we're only going to be able to tackle 2 today, but we'll have more in the course that will start next week. So in A/B testing, for example, this is an example of A/B testing. This is a famous A/B test that raised Obama $6 million in campaign donations, okay? So here's, you can see 2 completely different messages crafted for 2 completely different audiences, right? So if you were using, and honestly, I don't know if they actually use personas to make that kind of hypothesis, but personas can help you drive drive the hypothesis, okay? So for example, you can see that these different messages are really crafted for 2 different types of people. The first one seems to be more crafted for an audience that is more like involved in politics, right? So this might be, an advocate, political advocate of some sort, right? And say like, you're ready to join, you're ready to sign in, right? And so the hypothesis could be, which one is the best persona, which one is the best type of user to donate money? I mean, who's going to be more likely to donate money to the campaign, right? And what kind of action are they going to be more responsive to, sorry. So for example, you see the image on the right, it has a completely different message, right? There's a family photo in there. There is a completely different call to action that says learn more, right? This person, if we're targeting your message on this persona, you probably don't assume this persona is ready to donate. They probably want to learn more, right? So as of any A/B testing, there was a winner, right? Not all A/B testing have a winner, but as of a lot of tests, there was a winner. And the winner was the family-focused one. And the beauty of this is that if you have user profiles, customer profiles, personas to drive this kind of hypothesis, Now you can make several hypotheses and potentially make your A/B test and your conversion on the landing page even higher by presenting, by coming up with different hypotheses, right? For example, you may say, okay, let's assume at this point this is a family-focused individual who is more likely to donate to my campaign, right? What other things will this personas like and want to hear? Where will their wishes and fears will be? And each one of those elements, each one of those pieces of information will likely drive new hypotheses and questions. And you may want to answer those questions with A/B testing, right? Here I have another example. So imagine you're trying to sell a snack subscription. This is actually a use case scenario of someone that I helped very briefly, informally, but killer company, by the way, Austin-based. I have the link right there if you want to check it out. But so the idea is that you want to start a company, and you want to start a company that wants to sell healthy snacks, right? So healthy snacks may appeal to a variety of people, right? So you may appeal to a person who is very health conscious. You may appeal to moms who don't want to give junk food to their kids, right? You may want to appeal to the fitness person. I see a lot of yoga mats in this image suggesting that that's a particularly good fit. So once you have understanding of personas, you will be talking to them in a very different way, right? Or it's a subscription. Do you think you may appeal to people who don't have time to shop for healthy foods, right? And so you have to start answering questions such as like, do busy people want healthy foods, right? Is that one of those healthy people priority? So if you don't have a persona crafted, it's going to be hard, and you might end up making the mistake of sending mixed messages. And we know that in marketing, it's not good. You want to have a very consistent message that appeals to a very specific type of audience, right? And so an example of that is again the health message versus the saving time message. What you have to wonder, what will this person want to know, right? Well, they want to know that we're clean, that we don't have nasty ingredients in our snacks. Do they want to save time, right? What is the evidence that this type of persona is also focused on saving time? So again, to avoid sending this kind of mixed messages, you may want to focus on one or the other and just try to really craft a consistent message that really will convince that particular person to buy a product. Now, it's not that you have to choose for life, right? But certainly within the same landing page, you want to be consistent. Within the same website, you want to be consistent. Then again, if you really think your product appeals to a number of different people, there's no reason to craft different types of campaigns with different messages for those personas. Again, but having the clarity of knowing which personas you're trying to appeal to and knowing more about what are their wishes and desires will certainly help you reach that goal faster. And we're almost at time. So this was the end of my presentation. Please feel free to post in the chat whether you have any additional questions, whether on marketing, product. I'm waiting here for a few more. Okay, we just got a question. How do you gather persona data? Now that's an excellent question. As I said, there's very many different types of data, and you can gather really from whatever. But sometimes I work for companies that will have data sitting around. So, for example, warehouse data, right? Cookies data, right? Or Google Analytics. A lot of people, Google Analytics, if you don't have a huge website, they're typically free, right? So a lot of people install it, start collecting data, and never use it. So if you are one of those like data-driven person, you can start digging on like, what kind of data does my organization rely on, or what kind of data my organization collects that I can access, right? And so start from there. and really try to understand, are there elements in the data that's already sitting around that may help you understand something about my personas. For example, in another presentation, I used to have this example of the search words that people will land on my website for, right? So for example, I had an example on a jewelry website that was selling recycled plastic kind of jewelry. And really, there seemed to be three types of people that were searching and landing on my website through those search words. One of them was vegan jewelry. The other one was recycled jewelry. And the other one, and the third one was like by color, white earrings, right? So once you have, even just this information can give you something about personas and say like, well, it looks like I may appeal to vegan people, right? So try to understand something about how vegan people respond to, what kind of things do they want in a piece of jewelry? What things should I avoid? What things should I try to pursue? What kind of jewelry they wear, when, right? And so on and so forth, right? So this is one way to do it. The other way to do it is go around and schedule interviews with potential customers, right? So again, going back to the snack business, right? What I told this person is just encourage her to just go and talk to people, right? So go to your mom, go to your boyfriend's mom, go to all the moms that you know about it and ask them, would you buy this, right? And then the other one is, the other one was like the healthy person, like just literally go with a bunch of snacks in front of a gym, right? And wait for them to exit and give them a quick survey with a couple of key questions that might help answering this questions about, what do people who are interested in fitness want from a snack subscription? Do they want to save time? That's one of the questions that you may want to answer in this survey. So you really have to kind of identify the opportunity to gather the data. And so really any data is fine. Whatever data you have sitting around, if you have to look for it, very quick surveys and in-person interviews are the way I would go. So thank you for your question. It was a very good one. So another good question we have here is that, is there a number of personas you would recommend for a small company to focus on? This is a tricky question, right? So I heard one of my friends once told me, he used to work in a medium-sized company and with a team of 6 designers, right? So not a huge company for sure, not a smallest one, right? They told me we have 100 personas. So the key here is that the personas need to be actionable, right? It doesn't matter how large your organization is, but 100 personas, a team of 6 designers, will never find that actionable. How do you prioritize the personas? They're not all important. They're not all equally important, right? Do you have a persona for each one of your edge cases? That's probably not a good idea. So if I have my rule of thumb for small organizations, I think 3 to 5 is a very good number. The reason is because they might be vague, but it's a number to start with. And especially if you work in a company that embraces agile, the goal of your company might shift very quickly, right? So what you want to do is you want to start with a couple of personas to start formulating some hypotheses. So for example, you have 3 personas and you start wondering, will these 3 personas, what kind of message will appeal to any one of these personas? And then maybe one of your personas will have traction, right? And say you're trying to sell cars, right, in your website, and you realize that parents tend to buy a lot of cars. They buy cars for themselves, so they help their kids buy their cars. They change cars when they have to fit a third, car seat in the car. So you realize that you really want to focus on parents as a persona. Well, there's nothing wrong in taking that persona and kind of like explode it in different type of parents. And maybe you have the single mom, and maybe you have the working parents, right? And so start small. That's my recommendation. I think really 3 to 5 should be the basic number that you have to begin with, and then start formulating hypotheses and try to understand whether you need additional personas. So start with 3 to 5, and then I will say up to as many as your organization can digest. I will say that 100 is way too many for anybody. So I never go that high. Anybody has any other questions? We have another quick question here that says, will your slides be available? I will talk to my friends at CXL Institute and we'll see how to make it work. I don't have any problem making them available. So let us work on that. So let me see, there's another question here. Let me read it first, give me a second. Right, so somebody's making a comment that it seems like the Obama example seemed to be unfair, right? Because it didn't kind of explain the different market size, right? This is absolutely true. The example was not meant to say one persona, so my example was not meant to indicate that from A/B testing, you should be understanding which personas to focus on, right? Or maybe you can do that, but surely it wasn't speaking to. It wasn't really speaking for the size of the market share, for sure. The example of Obama was mostly meant to suggest that you should focus that you should focus mostly on the hypothesis, and the hypothesis will be more targeted and more likely to generate useful insights if they're based on an basic understanding of the personas, right? So if you have personas, it will be easier for you to make hypotheses. I'll give you again the car shopping example, right? So again, you're focusing on, you have a landing page, and there's two scenarios here, right? You have a landing pages and you design your landing page for moms, right? And you want to know which message will appeal to mom the most. Of course, there's many messages around. If you know more about your mom persona, then you for sure can have a more refined hypothesis right at the beginning instead of having to learn everything through A/B testing. Now the other one is the same as, as an example, like, I have a specific message and I want to understand which message will appear, which personas will this message appeal to the most, and so you can make that hypothesis as well. But again, it's more like for hypothesis driven A/B testing that personas are useful. Let me see. How do you decide on product features based on personas? This is an excellent question that I didn't have time to explore, so I'm very glad somebody asked. So the way you do it is literally to the same way as the marketing campaigns, right? So you have different types of personas, and say, let's say you have a company that sells analytics, right? You sell analytics for car shopping. And so what you have is, let's say two different types of personas. One is the parent and the other one is the money saver, right? So if you have hypothesis on the personas, and again, and if you've done your homework on like which from a marketing perspective you should focus on, right? So what is the most likely persona? What is your opportunity from a business perspective to sell these analytics to? Well, if you decide that mom is your niche target audience, then you will prioritize features based on which features of the product will appeal to mom the most, right? So for example, if you have to choose, if you know that moms are all about safety of the car, right? What would you do if you had the choice of your data science team, for example, producing analytics for the safest car or the cheapest car? Which one would you choose? Well, I would probably prioritize the algorithm about the safest car. So that's how you prioritize features in the roadmap. Now, that doesn't mean that you can also have an algorithm to calculate the price of the car and how good the price is compared to the market. But if you're trying to prioritize personas that are moms, then you may want to do that first and then see how people react to that kind of information. How many people do you normally interview or analyze in order to define characteristics or attributes that constitute one persona profile? Also, what do you think of the jobs to be done approach to define segments? All both very interesting questions. I think, so for interviews, I will say that between 6 and 12 people is a perfect number. Sometimes you will interview one person that will give you a ton of ideas, right? So don't limit yourself in interviewing just because you can't find 12 people right off the bat, right? But if you can interview 6 to 12 for each segment, that's an ideal number. Now, that being said, if you're afraid that you have potentially a lot of personas, for example, if you're selling a consumer-facing product that has potentially, like cars, for example, anyone could buy cars, right? So for you to limit to 12 people per persona might mean that you have to interview 100 people to have a just basic idea, right? So at that point, if your number starts being grow because you hypothesize that you have a lot of segments, then maybe starting with a surveys is better than starting with interviews. That would be my general approach. So 6 to 12 if you really have to do interviews, but if you realize that you will still have to have a lot of interviews to cover all the segments, then survey might be the way to go. And then as for the jobs to be done approach, it's a very good one, right? So one thing we didn't touch upon, which we'll discuss in length in the course that starting next week about personas, is that there's two ways to go about personas. One is the data-driven approach and one is the hypothesis-driven approach. So with the data-driven approach, you let the data tell you how many segments there are. With the hypothesis-driven approach, you kind of have an initial hypothesis on like, well, I think I have these 3 segments. This is very true in B2B businesses, right? Most people know in B2B what kind of customers they're targeting, right? So if that's true, the jobs to be done is one of the approaches that you can use to it's a framework, right? It doesn't change anything we said about the type of information that you want or how to collect the data, but it certainly defines one framework that you can embrace. So yeah, and I think this is all the questions. So yes, if there's any more questions, I thank you very much for all your participation and for your time. I really hope time was spent for you. And yeah, I look forward to see you potentially in the persona class that we have starting in a week.